Public imagination is fixated on the kinetic cost of war, hypersonic missiles, the Gulf military buildup. This is a deliberate misdirection. The adversary's calculus is not about matching firepower, a strategy with diminishing returns and predictable escalation. The primary vector is leverage. The target is not a carrier group, it is systemic solvency. The real threat is not a bang, it is silence. Strategic assessments by entities like CSIS confirm that 97% of global data, including trillions in daily financial transactions, travels through a network of undersea fiber optic cables. These are the unprotected arteries of the global economy. The kinetic cost to sever a critical node is negligible. The economic impact is a full-spectrum shutdown. It is the ultimate asymmetric weapon. This protocol is designed to create a specific state of paralysis, the blind Leviathan. A nation-state that retains its entire nuclear and conventional arsenal, but has had its central nervous system severed. Its satellites are blinded, its financial markets are frozen, its logistics networks are deaf. It becomes a giant without eyes, unable to project force, coordinate a response, or even maintain internal cohesion. The final trigger is not a battle, it is a systemic liquidity event. Digital assets, like the trillions at risk in Japan's dementia money crisis, simply cease to exist because the ledgers that prove their existence are offline. This isn't a theory. It's a mathematical certainty when applied to a system already hollowed out by industrial fragility, evidenced by Europe's aluminum production collapse and crippling energy dependence. The weapon is the switch that turns the lights off. War is not initiated for territory. It is initiated for solvency. When a nation-state faces a terminal domestic liability, a demographic collapse, a sovereign debt crisis, an unsustainable pension system, the mathematical imperative shifts. The kinetic cost of an external conflict becomes lower than the certain cost of an internal collapse. The war becomes a balance sheet correction. Consider the Russian Federation. Prior to the conflict, CSIS analysis framed the operational calculus not around imperial ambition, but around regime survival. Facing demographic decline and stagnating resource revenues, an unpopular war serves a dual function. It is a launch-on warning protocol against internal political fragmentation, externalizing domestic pressures and consolidating state power. The objective is not victory. It is the indefinite postponement of a solvency crisis. This forces a pivot to asymmetry. A state that cannot afford a conventional, peer-to-peer conflict must change the equation. It cannot destroy its adversary's military, so it must instead trigger a systemic failure in its adversary's economy. The strategy shifts from asset destruction to liability detonation. The primary vector is no longer the tank. It is the pre-existing, systemic fragility of the target. Western industrial and resource independence has been systematically dismantled, creating these exact vulnerabilities. Analysis from oilprice.com confirms a collapse in Europe's aluminum production, a foundational industrial component. Simultaneously, reports from Discovery, alert.com.au highlight critical U.S. dependency on foreign uranium, exposing a terminal vulnerability at the heart of its energy security. These are not accidents. They are manufactured liabilities on a national balance sheet. This architecture of weakness lowers the threshold for attack. A limited kinetic event, such as the Gulf military buildups detailed by Azer News, is no longer just a regional flare-up. It is a potential trigger. The objective is to force a systemic solvency event in the West, igniting a crisis like Japan's dementia money bomb, where Bloomberg notes trillions are already at risk. The adversary forces a choice: total economic capitulation or escalating to the final nuclear leverage point. The math is irrefutable. Conventional fragility is the primary accelerant for unconventional war. The economics of lethality have inverted. According to the Royal United Services Institute, RUSI, the kinetic cost to destroy a $5 million main battle tank is now as low as $500. This is not an imbalance, it is a systemic liability. The West's legacy platforms, built for a previous era of symmetric warfare, now represent a mathematical certainty of fiscal ruin in any sustained conflict. Every high-cost asset deployed is a pre-packaged economic loss waiting for a low-cost trigger. This radical cost-per-kill asymmetry is the engine of a new doctrine, the democratization of violence. Lethal standoff capability is no longer monopolized by state-level industrial powers. It has been outsourced to the commercial market. A non-state actor or a proxy force can now achieve battlefield effects that once required an air force, imposing attritional costs that a G7 nation cannot economically sustain. This lowers the threshold for attack to near zero. The primary objective is not to win a kinetic battle, it is to trigger a solvency crisis. While adversaries field disposable drones, the West must contend with its own industrial degradation. Reports confirm Europe's aluminum production has collapsed, making asset replacement prohibitively expensive. The reliance on foreign-controlled energy, such as uranium, creates another vector of attack. An adversary doesn't need to destroy an army. They only need to force it into a replacement cycle its own deindustrialized economy cannot support. This is attrition economics. This blueprint forces a zero-sum choice. Unable to sustain a conventional defense due to the inverted kinetic cost, a nation-state is backed into a corner. The options become capitulation to the adversary's demands or escalation to the final leverage point to stave off a full-spectrum economic collapse. The fragility of conventional capacity is a direct accelerant for a launch-on-warning posture. The math is irrefutable. The primary threat vector is no longer a conventional front line. It is the gray zone, a distributed network of proxy laboratories where the West's systemic failure points are stress-tested in real time. CSIS reports highlight manufactured instability in regions from Southern Africa to North America, not as isolated crises, but as calculated stagings. They are not the cause of the conflict. They are the controlled environment where the protocols of economic collapse are refined. These zones serve a dual purpose. First, to measure the kinetic cost and political will required for a response. Second, and more critically, to establish the plausible deniability needed to sever critical supply chains without triggering a formal military reprisal. Each staged riot or targeted infrastructure failure is a data point, feeding an algorithm designed to find the precise leverage point for maximum systemic disruption at minimum cost. While Western attention is diverted to these proxy fires, the true kinetic threat is positioned elsewhere. The military buildup in the Gulf, as documented by Azar News, is not a standalone regional dispute. It is the launch-on-warning component of a much larger asymmetric strategy. The gray zone activity is designed to degrade logistical capacity and command focus, ensuring that when the trigger is pulled in a primary choke point like the Strait of Hormuz, the response is fatally delayed. This strategy moves from the map to the real economy with mathematical certainty. The engineered collapse of Europe's aluminum production, cited by oilprice.com, is a direct consequence of this blueprint. A minor disruption in a proxy energy exporting state becomes an accelerant for deindustrialization. Similarly, America's dependency on foreign uranium, a key national security liability noted by RUSI, becomes a weapon. A gray zone event can halt shipments, forcing a drawdown of strategic reserves and creating an energy solvency crisis. The final vector is financial. Adversaries understand that demographic decline is a balance sheet liability. Japan's dementia money crisis, where trillions are locked in the accounts of the cognitively impaired, is not merely a domestic issue. It's a known vulnerability. A gray zone operation can be designed to trigger a liquidity panic, targeting the fragile systems that manage this capital. The goal is to weaponize an opponent's demographic solvency against them, turning a slow decline into a rapid, full-spectrum collapse. The gray zone, therefore, is the chessboard on which the initial moves of an unconventional war are played. It is where conventional fragility is weaponized. A limited kinetic event is no longer the endgame. It is the deliberate signal to activate pre-staged economic and social demolition charges, forcing a choice between total capitulation or the final nuclear leverage point. This is not a risk. It is a calculated liability. The final leverage point is not the missile. It is the protocol. Analysts at CSIS confirm the standing doctrine is launch on warning. This is a Cold War artifact, a mathematical tripwire. If high-confidence sensors detect an inbound kinetic strike, retaliation is launched before the incoming warheads can impact and destroy our own launch capability. The entire system is built on data integrity. Now, inject the modern vector, a targeted cyber attack. The primary objective is not to steal data, but to create a systemic information blackout. If an adversary blinds our early warning radar and satellite networks, the commander is faced with a zero-sum choice. Is it a network failure, or is it the electronic shadow of an incoming volley? The protocol allows no time for deliberation. The fear of a successful first strike forces the launch order based on the absence of information. This is the fog of digital war, where an asymmetric cyber event can trigger a full-scale kinetic response, forcing our hand and outsourcing the cost of escalation. The primary threat vector is no longer a carrier group in the Gulf. It is the fragility of the supply chain that supports it. With Europe's aluminum production in a state of collapse due to insurmountable energy costs, its industrial solvency now depends entirely on U.S. LNG exports. This dependency has transformed the U.S. Gulf Coast from an economic asset into a systemic, single point of failure liability. Adversary doctrine, per RUSI analysis, has shifted from kinetic cost imposition to systemic stress testing. A military buildup in the Gulf provides the necessary background noise for plausible deniability. The objective is not destruction, but data collection. A calibration shot designed to measure the economic blast radius of a targeted infrastructure failure, testing the West's response protocols and financial resilience before a wider event. The calibration forecast for the next 12 months. A coordinated, attribution impossible cyber-physical event targeting the control and compression systems of a key U.S. Gulf Coast LNG export terminal. It will be reported as a catastrophic industrial accident. The real metric is not the physical damage, but the event's velocity in triggering a European industrial shutdown and a launch-on warning cascade across global energy markets.